All right, I think we'll get started. My name is Steve Carpenter. This is a picture of me back when I had less hair on my face, in case you don't recognize me. I'm the executive director at Merck for our Global Business Services digital team. And I'll describe what that is in just a little bit. We're here to talk about how we are looking at process mining and automation in conjunction with each other. We've actually had a couple of different initiatives start up separately from each other, and now we're trying to figure out how do we pull those things together because we think it makes a lot of sense. So I'll talk through that and talk about what our experiences have been both on the automation side as well as on the process mining side, and then talk about how we've kind of started to figure out how to bring those things together. Again, interactive. Okay. Uh-oh. Maybe I won't start on time. Okay. So a little bit about MSD. So the folks in the US and Canada may know us as Merck and Company. We're a pharmaceutical company. The folks outside of the US and Canada should know us as MSD, Merck Sharp and Dohme. It's the same company. We have some name conflicts outside the US and Canada. So I've got the MSD logo because we're here in Germany. But basically, we've been around for more than a century. We're really trying to solve some of the challenges that affect both humans and animals on the planet as much as we can. From 2017 perspective, we had about 40 billion in revenue. We had about 70,000 employees, and we are basically headquartered out of Kenilworth, New Jersey, which is right outside of Newark, for those familiar with the US and in that area. Our vision is to make a difference in the lives of people globally. We really focus on innovative medicines, vaccines, animal health issues, and that's what we're trying to drive every single day. And we believe it's our responsibility to address the health needs of patients and society through transformational science. So you can see here on the upper right-hand side, the core areas of focus that we have are really around diabetes, hospital acute care, oncology, and vaccines. And then from an animal health perspective, we have different animal types that we work with and the types of medicines and other solutions that we provide to the folks that are dealing with cattle and swine and companion animals, dogs and cats, things like that, as well as poultry, equine, and aquaculture. So a little bit about Global Business Services. So I'm part of the Global Business Services team. I lead the digital organization. You can see our org chart right here on the right-hand side, and you can't see the world behind it, I don't think. It's a little bit grayed out, maybe, yeah. Anyway, that's supposed to be a picture of the Earth. Those are location markers. But basically, we have a global business services team that's made up of the design, which is basically our global process ownership team, so people who understand the process and understand how it responds and reacts today, and what we need to do to change it and drive change management over time. We have a delivery team, so the delivery team is really these three areas here. We have San Jose, Costa Rica, we have Prague, Czech Republic, and we have Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Those are our captive centers. And then we have a BPO relationship in Kolkata, India, that also does a lot of this work. So that's our delivery organization. Our business service centers' goals are really to be value-added partners to the markets that they serve. So we do focus, obviously, very specifically on the markets that are aligned to those regions. We want to deliver high-quality services. We want to provide insights. So there's a lot of data and analysis that we also work through. And then we're trying to continuously optimize our processes. And that's obviously where Celonis comes in, or else we wouldn't be here. Our BPO is really to ensure that we have the ability to extend the business service center capability. It's to provide sourcing alternatives, flexible staffing. If there's peaks, surges, things like that, we use our BPO to kind of drive a lot of that stuff, probably like most people in this room. And then we're trying to make sure that we have leverage of industry best practices through our partners, and then capitalize on the third-party pay scale and locations and all of that good stuff. So that's a little bit about our delivery team. We have a COE, so this is a team that's really responsible for internal financials, compliance and controls, making sure that we have continuous improvement activities ongoing, and that we're trying to drive what we call one global BSC network. So it doesn't make sense for us to do the same activity in Prague differently than it does in Malaysia or in Costa Rica or in India. We really want to have one global BSC network, standardized processes as much as possible across the globe. And that's really what our COE is driving. And then there's my team, the digital team. And part of what we do is process mining, obviously. Part of what we do is automation, obviously. We also do data and analytics. I own the master data functions, so vendor, customer, and finance master data. I own the technology decisions around which technologies we're going to use across the globe for the centers, and so on. We have some portfolio activities, some ERP support and change management activity. We have a lot of different things that are in that bucket. But that's really what our global business services team is here to do. That's how we're structured and organized. Our current scope, I didn't mean to make this a build, but our current scope is today very, very finance focused with a little bit of procurement kind of lumped in there. So we have order to cash. We have source to settle, and source to settle has a couple of different components, which is basically source to procure, procure to pay, pay to settle. There's even expense management that's kind of thrown into that one a little bit as well. We have account to record, and we have FP&A. And then there's an unsaid, undocumented fifth bucket of process that we own, which is, again, master data. And so it's really the vendor master tied to source to settle, the customer master tied to the order to cash process, and the finance master tied to both FP&A and A to R. So that's really who we are as GBS, as an organization. I'm sorry, design is our global process ownership team. So we have global process owners responsible for order to cash and source to settle and A to R and FP&A and MDM. And so they're there to make sure that those processes that are aligned to invoice payments, et cetera, are standardized globally, harmonized as much as we can. We've reduced a lot of the waste that's associated with them, et cetera. So they're really there to just kind of design and redesign the processes that we have in the Business Service Center. Okay? And again, for those of you who came in a little bit late, I definitely want to make this interactive, so if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So some of the opportunities and aspirations that we have, when we first kind of brought and stood up the Global Business Services team, I would say we were closer to being here on the left-hand side. So we had a human workforce model, right? Everything was done through humans. We did a lift and shift from our finance organization, and we basically took things as they were. So for instance, if we had a process that was running in Belgium that was different than the process that was running in Switzerland, we brought both of them in, and we kind of manufactured and worked through that process and executed on those processes. And that's where we layered in some of the design components to ensure that we could start to standardize that. But that's where we were. It's geographically dispersed. I don't know how many countries we're in, but you can imagine with 69,000 people and those service centers, we have a lot of different countries that we're focused on. We really didn't have a lot of tools that were consolidated, that were aligned. We had different e-invoicing tools in the US versus Europe versus none in Asia. And so there's really a lot of tools and technologies, hurdles that we had to kind of solve as we walked through our journey. We had limited expertise in automation, limited expertise in process mining. So I started about 18 months ago. I actually did some work on automation with Johnson Controls before I came here to MSD. And so we started to stand up some of those capabilities. We were automating specific tasks. We still are automating specific tasks, just so everybody knows, instead of the processes. And we basically have kind of Visio business models that are disconnected and isolated from themselves, as well as not necessarily updated on a regular basis. And then we have some small-scale pilots around automation that are happening in MSD altogether, but we didn't really have an ability to kind of look at all these things together. So that's where we were. We've changed. Our aspirations really are to get to the right-hand side. So I would say we're somewhere between the left and the right. But we really think that we need to have enterprise capabilities and integrated technologies. We want to make sure that the technologies that are in Malaysia work the same way that they work in Prague versus Costa Rica versus India. We want to make sure that we have action-based decision-making. So obviously, we heard a lot today about the action engine and how do you take some of the insights that you get out of the process mining and turn those into things that people can do to make the process better. So that's really where we want to go. We want to have business analytics that are also there. So instead of having just a report that people look at and mine through on their own, I'd really like to have an exception report or an exception report with recommendations so that people know what to do and how to do it. And so that's where we're targeting to go. We want to automate the end-to-end process as much as possible. It doesn't always make sense, but wherever we can, we want to look at it from wing to wing. We don't necessarily want to look at it from task to task. And we're trying to drive an enterprise process model. So how do we take our current Visio, PowerPoint process models, understand how they align to the existing processes, connect them together, understand what the inputs and outputs are, and so on. And that's what we're trying to drive with our enterprise process modeling. And then we want to create long-term value, all so that we can save on costs, we can reduce our cycle times, we can improve our quality, and we can increase our service availability. So that's our goal. Those are our aspirations. Those are the things that we're trying to drive as part of this organization. So some of the things that we've looked at from an insights perspective, some of the successes that we believe we had, some of the challenges we think we still have. We believe that process leadership, the design element that I talked about, is key. We think that the global process ownership teams are there to standardize, to harmonize, to normalize, to clean out the waste, to really drive those improvements, ensure that we have the same activities happening from center to center to center, to our third-party partners, et cetera. And so that people have a good view as to what those processes are and how they work. And they can be consistent no matter who performs them or how they get performed. We also believe that the agile automation approach has benefits, and so I don't necessarily mean agile in terms of development of the automations, so the actual IT part of it. I mean agile in terms of being able to iterate between and as well as kind of build a kind of a minimum viable product, a small automation that takes some work and then to expand it and increase the scope of that. So that's what I mean by agile automation. Obviously, process fragmentation and inconsistencies, I think everybody here understands that. Those are things that challenge us, that require us to, again, drive things through our global process ownership team so that we can get standardized, consistent processes. And then, I don't remember who talked about this, but this was brought up, I think it was in the keynote, where a lot of the processes that we looked at, I think it was actually when they introduced what Celonis is and how they kind of came to being. The process redesign based on SME knowledge is very, very difficult. We talked to, in the beginning of our journey, when we talked to people about a specific process, if you talk to 10 different people, you get 11 different answers as to how the process actually works. So people are as flawed as their knowledge extends, and they don't necessarily understand exactly how those processes work. So this is where we started to look at this and identify that we needed a technology that helped us in that process redesign. So our value, what we call our value-driven approach, is a couple of different things with some supporting capabilities underneath them. The first one is our business process automation. So how do we automate the highly leveraged processes, the things that are redundant and rules-based and done over and over again? And then how do we do that across the different groups that are within MSD? So I'm talking specifically for global business services, but we don't need to necessarily stop at global business services when it comes to automation. So how do we continue to drive that across the entire enterprise? And then alongside that, as soon as we start to get into some of the more cognitive automations, the more decision-making type automations where we need some machine learning or other capabilities that are there, we're going to have to start to look at our business analytics, our data foundation, trying to understand how do we integrate things across different systems and harmonize them and use that information to then help the machines make better decisions as we go. So those are the two big pillars that we have for the organization that I'm driving within GBS as well as outside of GBS. The components that are really important to support that, we believe, is, at least in anything that's very process-focused, is we need to have consistent methods, tools, technologies, ways of working. How do we ensure that we have the same e-commerce experience, for instance, in Malaysia versus Prague versus Costa Rica versus the markets, Switzerland, Venezuela, wherever you go, how do we have a same kind of e-commerce or any other type of technology experience, right? It makes it very difficult for us to standardize the process if the technologies are different. Not to say it can't be done, but it is something that we're trying to drive. Obviously, the technologies and capabilities that we want to drive, and specifically, I'm calling out Celonis on this one, are important for us because we believe that it makes a lot of sense for us to understand and look at the process, understand the variations, so that we can actually start to do some of this business process automation. And then from an enterprise process management perspective, we talked a little bit about the successes where we have the process excellence capability, the design team. We believe that process leadership, design standardization, and improvement is a critical foundational layer for that. So this is the value-driven approach that we've taken in order for us to move forward. Obviously, Celonis is a part of this. Obviously, automation components are a part of this. So our guiding principles, and I won't go through this slide in its entirety, but if you have questions, let me know. We've figured out ways that we wanted to drive prioritization, which is really around processes. We want to make sure that we're not creating downstream problems. So you saw today in the keynote where they actually took more digital orders, but they didn't have the capability to stand up the digital invoicing as well at the same time. And so from that perspective, we want to minimize some of the cascading and make sure that we're looking at the downstream, which is why we want to look at this from an end-to-end process perspective. We have a lot of controls in our space because we're a pharmaceutical company. We are averse to risk naturally, just because that's what we do. And so we want to make sure that we have the right controls in place, but sometimes if we're automating some of these things, we can eliminate some of those controls. We can automate some of them. We want to balance the ability for our automation journey to move forward versus the transformation that we have to do in the process. So there are some instances where we are automating a substandard process, and I think Bill Gates said it, and I have a quote later on in this, that if you're automating an inefficient process, you're basically just automating inefficiency faster, which is fine in some instances. And so we believe that there are some cases where we can automate some processes, knowing that they're going to be throwaway going forward. We like to measure and realize by process, so we have several value drivers. Some of them are cost, quality, cycle time. We do we look at peak shaving, so basically there's a lot of seasonality in some of the work that we do, especially in the finance space, especially in the account to record space or the FP&A space. We have different seasons that drive things for us, and so we typically have temporary contractors, or we even have people working additional hours, charging overtime in order to deal with some of that seasonality. So we really want to try and look at that seasonality and try and get rid of that as much as we can. The other two things that we've added recently is that we want to be able to look at reusability. We don't want to necessarily create a component that isn't going to have applicable use later, even if we're going to throw it away. As long as we can build some of those reusable components that we're trying to drive, then we think that we can start to do some automation. And then there's a lot of automation that happens without any oversight. So there's a lot of people who go out there and create macros in Excel or wherever, and they're using that to run their day-to-day job. That's fine. It helps people out. It gives them productivity, but what we want to do is have a little bit of oversight around that. So we're trying to drive automation of even the macros in Excel into something that we can take a look at. So those are the things that we're trying to drive from a realization perspective. Change management, get your stakeholders engaged, work through your markets. These are lessons that we've learned and made sure that we're trying to drive this. And then when people have to interact with the bots themselves, there's a change management aspect to this. There's an education to this. They don't understand the bots all the time. And so it makes sense for us to continue to educate them as we go. And then from a technology perspective, it's the standard stuff: scalability, governance, reusability, starting basic, growing from there, evolving, et cetera. So these are the guiding principles that we've used to start our automation. And again, as we start to look at intake options, as we start to look at the ability to oversee some of these processes, we start to incorporate some of the Celonis activities into there. We started, okay, so for those of you who didn't hear, I believe the question was, did we use Celonis to kickstart the automation program? The answer is no. So I started 18 months ago. Our first focus was automation. And so we started to build some of these principles and driving a lot of the automation activities that we have today before we ever got the process mining solutions in place. So we went live, and this is a good segue. Thank you very much for that. We went live in 2018 with our basically our source to settle stuff and our order to cash stuff. And then we've got some supply chain things that are kind of out there as well. We're not heavily focused on that in GBS, but there's several, I think 7 different process models that we have live. And all of them went live at the earliest in fall of 2018. Our automation program started in summer of 2017. So we have 2 different, paths, if you will, that we're trying to figure out how do we converge those, because we believe that there's power in process mining combined with automation. And especially if you start to look at some of the new things that Celonis is trying to drive with the Intelligent Business Cloud and the Action Engine and being able to call different robots within that framework, we think that those things are really good for marriage. So the question is there a direct link between Celonis and our automation activities today? And the answer is, and when you say a direct link, do you mean like will a process kick off a robot? Is that what you're thinking? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yes. If you look at the marketing material, and I don't know if there's any Celonis people in the room, I don't know if there's any Celonis people in the room, but if you look at the marketing material and you see the demos, the Action Engine allows you to call a robot. Not in the future, it exists. It's GA now. And so I'm actually going to go talk to Stefan and German later today to figure out exactly how that's going to work and how do we do a prototype. But I would say today, in our world, the way that we have things set up, we do not have our process mining tool and our RPA tool linked, except for we can see how the RPA activities happen because we know which IDs we're using to perform those automated tasks. And so we know how to kind of identify the automation components versus the manual components. And I'll show you a little bit of that in our order to cash space in just a little bit. Okay? All right, so our process mining roadmap. So all of that I just talked about was really around what's our automation journey, what's our automation path. Now we have our process mining roadmap that started up basically last year sometime. And in the fall, we went live with several models in source to settle. So we have basically all around the document. So we have our SRM, which is focused on our purchase requisition. We have P2P, which is focused on the purchase order. And we have AP, which is really focused on the invoice associated with that. So that's kind of a wing-to-wing visibility from a source to settle perspective that we're trying to drive. They're doing a lot of cool things, and Eddie's in the back in the pink shirt over here somewhere. So if you want to look him up and talk to him about what he's doing, he's got a lot of really cool stuff going on. But we're looking at payment timeliness. We're looking at the purchasing lifecycle, so the wing-to-wing view of all of this. He's even got a couple more things because he went to a boot camp recently that I haven't even debriefed on. So There's a lot of stuff that he's focused on, as well as we have a big S2S transformation initiative that just kicked off. And so the goal is, can we start to use Celonis to help identify how do we organize and reorganize and redesign some of the processes that we have in order to fit into the source to settle transformation initiative. So that's what's going on in source to settle. Order to cash, right now all we have is order management. Again, that went live in the fall. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the analysis that we've done in order to cash. And then we have a pipeline of things where we're looking at accounts receivable, credit, expense management, master data, some custom processes that we have, specifically some in the regulatory affairs in the pharmaceutical world. That's a big thing, but we're looking at some custom processes that we're going to try and drive this year and next. And then the supply chain team they have a fairly extensive roadmap as well, and so they've done some things. If anybody's interested in the supply chain side of things, I can't speak to it personally, but I can put you in touch with the people in MSD that can. Are
you trying to link some of the supply chain back to
Not yet, although our order to cash process model, or process mine, whatever the right verbiage is, we actually are being used by both supply chain and the finance teams. So there are different aspects of it that they're both interested in, so we haven't necessarily figured out how that looks wing to wing, but that is a goal, definitely a goal.
Just a question on the supply chain. I know you provided you're looking more in the planning or in the, let's say, execution part?
I definitely know that they're looking at execution. I believe that they're starting to think about planning as well. So if you have questions, give me your contact details, and I can hook you up with the right person inside MSD. Okay? All right, so from an order to cash perspective, we started to focus on this a little bit, and this is a little bit of this is retrospective, a little bit of this is aspirational, and I'll kind of point out the things. So you'll see some charts from Celonis, so you'll see that some of this is actually real. But we basically went live in fall of 2018, and so we made some automation decisions ahead of time that aren't necessarily tied to how Celonis would have given us the answer. So what we tried to do is go back. Would Celonis have given us the same answer? And can we use it now going forward, because we've gone live with a pilot in one of our markets, and now can we basically take that and replicate it, see what the other markets are that need the most support, the most help, using the Celonis engine in order to drive that. So we looked at one market. You'll see the results here specifically for a single market in Europe. On a monthly basis, we have about 10,000 faxed orders that come in, and we have people who are processing those orders. And it's basically 100% manual, and it takes about 5 minutes to kind of work through an order process. Okay, so that's kind of the scenario as we set it up. If you take a look at this particular market, you can see, and again, we have about, let's say 9,000. This is a specific month. Okay, so we have about 9,000 orders that came in that were basically 100% manual. So we were about 71% automated in total, but those 9,000 orders, 10,000 orders, whatever that is, cause a lot of manual work. So if you do the math, you'll understand how many person hours are associated with that. And when we look at the rest of the process, we really think we need to focus on creating the sales order. So again, this is retrospective, but this is good because we actually made this decision ahead of time, and we were right. So we did some work to basically automate this process. We use Outlook. We use robots, so we're using our tool of choice for robots is UiPath. We're doing some file shares and other things like that where we're picking stuff up. We're using our SAP instance, and we're basically driving this entire process. We have different exceptions. You can see what those are. If anybody wants to understand a little bit more about this process, we can talk at another time. But basically, the goal is that we're using a piece of technology that allows us to, in a machine learning type of application, if you will, to basically start to read what those customer orders look like, where the quantities are, which products they're actually ordering, what the customer is. So we use an OCR tool that has some machine learning capabilities associated with it to start to kind of automate some of this stuff. And then this was to basically interpret the information, and then we use the robots and SAP activities to actually just enter the data in. So we no longer have a manual human workforce for the things that we can automate. And you'll see here that we went live. this is a picture of November. So you can see the 29% matches up. But we went live with this at the end of January, I think it was January 21st. And initially, I think we were automating about 20% of all the orders that came in through this process. We're now up to about 80% of all the orders that came in through this process. And you can see this is my Celonis trend chart that shows the manual activities that have happened over time based on the fact that we automated this. So what I'm trying to show here and trying to depict is that this was one market. This was for a specific scenario within order to cash, and we automated it, and we looked at this retrospectively through Celonis. But now we believe that going forward, we can look at all of the other markets that are out there. We can look at how those orders come in, and we should be able to drive similar results doing that. And so that's where we're going to try and find the value in the Celonis space. So questions on this? Yeah.
So basically, the report that you mentioned regarding 70% automation, that can be generated from any of the other, let's say, reports from SAP in terms of automation rates that you're currently in and where you are, let's say, after a period of time.
Yeah.
So where exactly Celonis is adding the value, because the bots can improve your automation and you can generate a report from your system regarding automation. So where is the exact value point of Celonis?
So the value point of Celonis is that we now can look across all markets, all at the same time, and we can identify the ones that specifically have issues. I can do that through SAP, you're absolutely correct. But I can also do that in one spot, one location, instead of Catherine, who's in the audience over here, sitting there and trying to analyze each and every market through the SAP reporting process, she can analyze it through Celonis. Okay, so that's one aspect, one benefit of it. I think the other benefit of it is, gosh, this is one use case. Gosh, this is one example where we retrospectively went back and used process mining to identify that we made the right decision. And wouldn't it be great if we could do that across all of our processes? And so that's basically the next step for us is now that we've got a use case that we looked at and we said, hey, this worked. We were right. Just instinctually, we were right. But we can do this in a much better way, in a much more scalable fashion. And then we can start to take a look at some of the other activities and features that Celonis is starting to bring in, which is really around how do I connect those things to actions and drive things through robots instead of through humans and things like that. So that's, for this exercise, it was a reporting tool. Going forward, it's going to be a reporting tool, but then also we're starting to explore the other capabilities of how do we turn those things into actions and recommendations. Yes, sir. There is, but that is really around capturing what's happening on the desktop. So for instance, everything that I'm showing you, everything that's in Celonis today is SAP and only SAP. And so I have a transaction ID that basically starts the order process and then goes all the way through. What I don't have is, well, what happened when our order management processor got that information? Did they go off to a spreadsheet and look something up? Did they go out to a website to check credit? Did they do this, that, or the other thing? Those are things that we don't have captured, and that there is a UiPath and Celonis agent. I don't know what else to call it, but that will allow us to install that agent on a desktop and understand as they connected to SAP, they saw this, and then they went over here and did this and this and this, and it'll kind of show us, it'll show us the in-between steps that you don't necessarily see when you're just looking at SAP. Okay. And so we haven't explored that yet. But this is our analysis that says, yes, we definitely think that we should move forward with Celonis. We definitely think we want to do this for all the procure-to-pay stuff and anything else we do within our organization, and we want to drive those activities. And then, oh, by the way, we should also get some of that in-between activity that's happening on the analyst's desktop so that we can pull all that stuff together in one single model. So that's the goal. We started automation, not necessarily this automation. This automation actually started around the same time as the Celonis.
Okay. My question is, was there already some kind of an automation rate for, let's say, specific to the sales order item that was created? You already had existing automation in this process?
So the question was, do we have an existing automation in this particular process? The answer is no.
Okay, so then completely it was robotics that you opted to automate.
It was through instinct and SAP reports and subject matter expertise and polling lots of different people as to what are the things that we should be doing, which markets should we be focused on, and how should we be driving this. The good news is that through all of that, which took a lot of energy, we now have looked back and said, gosh, Celonis would have told us this if we had just used it. And by the way, it can now tell us this for all these other markets that we already have inside this tool. And by the way, we can now take it forward and start to do some other actions with it as well.
Okay.
So that's really the message here.
Okay. Of course, the automation rate is still around 71%, so that means the model is still failing. So
No, it's not failing. This is automation. So there are manual processes. We have 10,000 faxed orders. Each and every one of those was 100% manual. That was here. Okay? We now have taken that number down to about 10% of the total. So about 70% are already automated through EDI or whatever. The other 30% were manual. Now we only have about 10% of those same numbers as manual through this process. Okay, so we've really started to kind of lock down what that should look like. Yes, sir.
So you said you use it in GBS, right? And supply chain is also planning to use it in the future. So they have their own ideas, so to say.
Yeah.
How is the tool set up? The Celonis tool in your at Merck, like you own that tool, you own the capability.
So what does the COE look like? Is that what you're looking? Okay, so the question is, if supply chain and GBS are both using it, what is our organizational structure to support it? So it's a combination of IT, of data scientists on my team. There's actually a couple in the room back here. And then obviously the design team, the global process teams that are associated with it. And then from a supply chain perspective, they're bringing the same type of organizational structure. So they have their own data scientists and their own global process owners. And we're aligned. So we're working together but separately. They're driving their initiatives, we're driving our initiatives. Where they overlap, we have a bi-weekly call where we're trying to make sure that we're keeping in touch. We're not doing it for us, that's the way we work. Okay. I'm gonna just speed through the next couple of slides. I got 9 minutes left. So this is our current automation roadmap, and I wanna highlight the asterisk here. This is only for GBS, and this is only the things that have global impact. If you'll see down here in the bottom left-hand side of the slide, we have 120 or so small regional automations that we're driving. Those aren't things that we're looking at through the Celonis lens. Those aren't things that we're looking at through a process standardization lens. Those are just things that we're looking at because we want to start to monitor and observe some of the work that we're doing. We also have some stuff in the tax and treasury space that have actually gone live that aren't part of this roadmap. So those are we have a lot of different automation activities happening. These are the specific ones that are going to be driven, and in the cases of some of the green arrows, we're going to start to take a look at how does the process work, and how do we start to understand the things that we should be automating. Because again, if you see this spaghetti mess of a process, you don't want to automate all of that. You're basically going to build a fragile robot. So we're really trying to understand what are the big happy path plus a couple of deviations or variants. How do we start to take a look at that and then specifically focus on automating that? And then how do we standardize into that process versus create the robot to deal with the entire mess of variations? So that's really what we're focused on. So we've got a lot of different activities that are happening in 2019. You won't see anything in Q4 because obviously Q4 for us is a freeze period to make sure that we can close the books and drive whatever revenues we can in our organization. Yes, sir.
Question. You mentioned that you have used Celonis only for the analysis of SAP systems.
Today.
Those processes are wider than SAP systems.
Correct.
And now you are interested in the integration via RPA of those process steps in the
Yep.
SAP system. Is that correct?
That is correct. So the question is not even a question, more of a statement, that we're using Celonis to look at SAP today, and we're looking to try and figure out how do we look at some of the in-between places, but we're also looking to expand our coverage of true source systems. So again, if I go out to a website to check a credit worthiness of a customer, that's probably not something that I'll be able to ever kind of pull in to my Celonis model without going through a desktop type view of things. But if we start to look at the e-commerce website itself that we have, we should be able to take that and integrate it into our process models. Very similar to what Tina did this morning for the Celosphere example. So those are the types of things that we're starting to drive. We also have a second SAP instance, or a third SAP instance that we haven't even touched yet, that do very similar processes for different parts of our business that we're trying to pull in together as well.
So we are focused on the integration of the steps outside of SAP in SAP processes via an RPA. Is it correct?
So the RPA tool itself is basically an agent that'll allow us to look at what happens on a person's desktop. It doesn't have to be in between the SAP steps. It just is the stuff that they do on their desktop. So if they go into SAP, it'll register that. If they then go into an Excel spreadsheet or an Outlook email or a website, it'll also register that. If they go into the e-commerce platform, it'll register that. So I don't know exactly how those linkages work yet. We haven't looked at it in a lot of detail, but that's something that we're trying to drive in our organization. All right, so let me just talk about this and I'll get to the rest of the presentation with questions. So future perspective, what are the things that we're worried about? What are the things that we're focused on? So from an automation point of view, right? So Celonis can be used to help us in our automation journey. Celonis can be used to do stuff outside of automation. So the UiPath agent that I just kind of mentioned, we're starting to explore that. We're starting to figure out what does that mean for us? How do we implement that? How do we understand the data that comes in? Because if somebody's doing some work and then while they're waiting, they're going out to Facebook, I don't necessarily want to see that. So there's a lot of things that we're starting to figure out exactly how this is going to work for us. But we want to start that process capture. The analysis that I showed you around automation isn't necessarily in every one of our process models either in Celonis. And so we want to make sure that as we start to do some automation analysis, or as we start to do some of these process mines, we want to build in that automation analysis into the process itself so that we have a way to start to look at what's manual, what's automated, and how do we start to drive that. So that's something that we're looking to do. And then we absolutely are going to try and drive to the action engine. And so how do we take some of these things, how do we make these, the engine give us some recommendations on what is the next step that we should be looking at in order to do something, and then can I call a bot from that point of view? So instead of having something assigned to a human, the signals that you saw in the action engine itself, can I assign that to a robot and have the robot go off and execute some of those activities? So those are the things that we're starting to look at in 2019 and 2020. From a Celonis perspective, beyond the automation, we're looking at the GBS migration process. So we're really, we've taken in a lot of activities in the finance space. There's more activities we need to take in. We'd love to use Celonis to be able to give us insight into those activities before they come in. We'd love to be able to go out and talk to the markets that are already in the GBS space and use the Celonis information and insights to basically show them where we need their help, where we need them to make certain changes in order to make us more successful. And then, obviously, we want to standardize as much as we can of all of our key processes. All right, so I'm going to end there, but I will take questions for the next 3 minutes. Yes? I don't know the answer to that. I'll talk to them and see what the policy is. If everything's being shared, then it'll definitely be shared. We can talk later because you asked a couple questions. Yes, sir. So the P2P process was our first value realization, proof of value type of process. And so then that basically led us to purchasing 10 models, 10 model licenses, and then deploying it out to the rest of the SRM stuff and the AP and the order management stuff. So that was kind of PTP, procure to pay. That was our first process that we did. Yes, sir.
Did you use also Celonis to get out RPA backlogs, like I get in the insight from the Celonis, or you had already backlog that's based on your insights of a process to define automation, like that you just go through the insight part of Celonis. I'm just trying to understand if you use practically Celonis as well to define the backlog
So the question is, can we define backlog using the Celonis engine for our automation activity? And I would say the answer is yes. We haven't turned that into something real just yet. We're working on that. But obviously, if I can see a process that is being done over and over and over again in the same way, I can automate that happy path, and I can identify what the manual efforts are associated with those things, and then we should be able to use that to build up our pipeline for automation. So it's theory, but we think that we've started to prove it out through that order to cash analysis that says, yes, Celonis can be used to do this type of work. So, all right, one more question? Anyone? Yes, sir.
More organizational question, because you showed us your agenda for the next month.
Mm-hmm.
And who's setting the topics? You, business partners, etc. Or,
Good question.
always the topic. There's someone who's pushing what is mining, there's someone who's pushing the RPA, and most of the time they're not the same person.
Yeah. So I would say that I'm not setting the agenda myself. In this room, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 global process owner representatives here from the various functions that we have. And there's 2 data scientists that are here from our world. And so we together as the digital team and the design team, and now we're working with the delivery team, we're trying to set this agenda as a group, building our shared commitments to ensure that we have the ability to drill down. So from that perspective, I would say it's more of a group discussion than it is, Steve standing in front of the room saying this is what we should be doing. Although that's, sometimes I do that. All right, I thank you very much for your time and attention. Appreciate it.
Hey, Steve. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much for this insight. I want to introduce